thank you to everybody for attending this topic of full coverage irrigation in the agricultural industry is very, very important, apparently, by the huge number of registrants and attendees that we've got for this very important topic. So thank you for attending the Nelson Irrigation Technologies webinar on full coverage irrigation in orchards and vineyards. Our presenter today is John Rowley. John Rowley has been at Nelson Irrigation for about 28 years now. He lives here in Walla Walla. He's a territory manager for a vast area, plus the product manager at Nelson Irrigation for the Rotator product line, which is very an extensive and important product line for us at Nelson Irrigation and is used worldwide. He's got a bachelor's degree in horticulture and an MBA, so he's spent a lot of time in college. He grew up on a farm, and that's probably been amongst his most important educational years, and he's a farmer now himself. He and his wife, Lynette, live here in Walla Walla, that raised their family and have been a part of the farming community and the Nelson team for a long time. So with that, we would like to welcome everybody for attending. And John, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Steve, and welcome to everybody who's a part of this. I am grateful for the opportunity. I'm going to just get started right into the topic of full coverage irrigation. This is a topic that we have discussed many times at Nelson Irrigation, and there's many ways to view this term, full coverage, and we first really want to define what we mean by full coverage right at the onset of this discussion, because it might mean something different than you think. One way to start that discussion is to talk about what full coverage from our perspective is not, at least in the context of this presentation today. And one of the things it's not is a field that's flooded or irrigated with corrugates or some other flood checks or some other method of flood irrigation. Now, one might call that full coverage, but from our perspective, many of the benefits we're going to talk about full coverage don't come into play with that type of irrigation system. When we talk about full coverage irrigation as well, we are talking about, for the most part, an irrigation system that waters the entire land area. So it waters the drive row centers of orchards and vineyards and other permanent crops. And here is the most important key to the kinds of systems that we're going to talk about today. These are low application rate systems. So in tree and vine, we're talking about 0.04 to 0.12 of an inch per hour kind of application rates, low application rates. So again, back into the discussion of what these kind of systems are not. They are not the old sprinkler systems of orchards of 30 years ago with impact sprinklers. Those systems are higher application rate systems in general. Another key factor is generally uniformity is high from the standpoint of measuring the collection of the sprinklered water. So that kind of uniformity, and the lowest these systems are usually is this Christensen's coefficient of uniformity of 80% and a distribution uniformity of 70%. A lot of times the effects of wind and obstruction are and should be mitigated in these kinds of systems. And lastly, emission rates are uniform across the block. And this just gives me a chance to take a minute and distinguish a couple really important terms. A lot of you may have received education in micro irrigation from the IA or other sources. And in that education, you'll learn a term called DU. DU in many discussions is actually what we would call emission uniformity. That's the how uniform each emission device is relative to the other emission devices in a block is. How close are they all to the same? And sometimes the term DU is used to describe that emission uniformity. What we describe as DU has to do with the sprinklers themselves and the uniformity of the distribution of the water coming off the sprinklers. Now, we won't go into the detail of how DU is calculated and all that today. We don't have time for that, but that's for another day, another session. But just keep that in mind. It has to do with the way the water is distributed, DU, not the emission uniformity. But a good full coverage system has both. It has a high distribution uniformity, and it also has a high emission uniformity. Now, the products that are often used to create these kinds of systems are what you see at the bottom of this slide. Our R5 rotator, our R10 rotator, our R10T, R2000, and even on the overhead type systems, the R2000 WF and LP and R33 LP and standard R33. Also, some full coverage systems are also put in depending on sprinkler layout with our new S7 spinner as well, and in the future our new R7 rotator. So I'm going to start out by showing a couple slides real quickly, two different slides. The slide you see now is what might be termed as an air blast sprayer. It's a traditional method of spraying fungicides and insecticides on permanent crops. It usually uses high gallonage, usually on the bottom end, 50 gallons a minute per acre up to 200 gallons a minute per acre. The other sprayer that I want to show you is the one I flashed through at first, and trying to find my previous button here, and I don't see it, so I'll just I'll back up to it. And this is what we call an electrostatic sprayer. And you'll notice that the purpose of both sprayers is to apply either a fungicide or an insecticide to a vineyard, and in the pictures. And so they both can accomplish the same thing, but they both do it quite a bit differently. And for some purposes, one sprayer may be more effectively used than another. There are some fungicides and some insecticides that require a higher gallonage of water per acre to be effective. And there are others that do not. And so the smaller gallonage electric static sprayer with 4 rows of treatment may be completely adequate. And I think that really helps us understand the kind of discussion we want to have today. And that is that our discussion is not intended to state or even to imply that drip irrigation has no purpose or that it's not useful. And in fact, it's very useful. Steve mentioned I farm myself. I farm 110 acres of permanent crops, and I have drip irrigation on every acre. I also have sprinklers on every acre as well. And that's becoming a very common thing in agriculture now, to have dual systems. And it simply provides the growers with more tools to accomplish the things they need to make their bottom line or the efficiency of their operation more complete, and in the end affect their bottom line. So as a quick example, I could estimate this year, if you look at all the acres of apples planted in the state of Washington and Oregon, 80% of them have both sprinkler and drip systems installed in those settings. And we see more and more of that as we go around the world. So we're going to focus today on the primary benefits of the full coverage part of that dual irrigation system. And many of these benefits are not available if one just selects to irrigate with only a drip system. So the quick summary of those is to germinate cover crops. So we're going to spend some time discussing all the benefits of cover crops. To reduce salinity, we'll spend a little bit of time on that. To prevent crop stress, to apply and incorporate fertilizers, and most of the time herbicides, and then to prepare an orchard floor for harvest. And as we go through these different topics, you'll see different functions of a full coverage system and how they help enhance all of these needs that an operator of a permanent crop will have. So we'll start with the cover crop. Many years ago, Steve McCoon, who's our host today, actually took this photograph. And this is an apple orchard just outside Walla Walla, and it's a silt loam soil. And it's the kind of soil that if there's not a vegetative cover on this soil, with the kind of slopes that are there on the site, which range from 1 to 7%, when there's a rainfall event, if the soil is bare, the ground will erode. The ground will seal quickly, and then it'll begin to erode, and it'll erode large canyons. And so this grower had not just cover crop was not just a good option; it was essential. And that's often the case on certain sites. If erosion is going to be a problem from rainfall events, cover crops and getting them established and maintaining them prevent that erosion. They prevent the erosion in large measure by improving the infiltration rates. They also can be well selected to improve or prevent the growing of noxious weeds or other unwanted weeds in the field. And I've experienced that myself. If you select the right kind of slow growing grass, you don't mow very much, even with full coverage system, and it holds the water in the ground, gets your water in the ground really well, regardless of the intensity of a rainfall. Cover crops can also serve as a habitat for beneficial insects. There, a lot of our university extensions in the United States will provide a list of crops that you might select as a beneficial habitat as a habitat for beneficial insects. They also can reduce dust. And a hot, dry year like we're having in the Pacific Northwest, that's a pretty big deal, because I'm right now, as we speak, on my farm, I've got somebody out there with a sprayer, and we're spraying for mites. Now, we usually don't spray for mites, but the heat really brings the mites on that we've had in the last 4 weeks. And that mite pressure will be less with the less dust that you have. Some will use full coverage systems to manage dust in the orchard. So, for example, some operators will they might be irrigating with drip irrigation for a period of time, but during that period of time, when they need to mow or do some field operation in the field, they'll run their sprinklers for a few hours prior to that operation to mitigate dust effects. It's very common for full coverage systems to be used to produce what we call green manure crops. A lot of times these crops, again, can be selected with special species that are legume species that fix nitrogen, or like you see in the photograph here, they can be the type of crops that are used to provide a number of other biological benefits. In this case, you see a Sudan grass crop planted on a very sandy soil in an almond planting. And so there's a whole bunch of benefits that growing that Sudan, chopping it up, disking it into the ground can provide for that soil. One of them immediately on a crop like Sudan is if you grow Sudan and then you incorporate it, you immediately improve your soil structure and your infiltration. There are certain elements or essential nutrients that crops need, permanent crops need. The primary three being, of course, as many of you know, nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. And some of those elements are immobile in the soil. And they're immobile in the soil even to a level that it's difficult to apply them through drip irrigation. Well, in permanent crops, if you establish and maintain a cover crop, nearly always most permanent crops will not require applications of phosphorus. And that's because the growth of that cover crop, it's sending roots down into the soil, creating a biological cycle of making phosphorus available in the soil, will prevent the need to apply that particular element. So cover crops do enhance over time the availability of some nutrients. Cover crops, as we talked about earlier, they improve soil infiltration, and we could have a long discussion about that. We won't, because we're going to limit this to about 30 minutes, but a lot of that has to do with the beneficial microbiology that begins to be enhanced by having moisture in the entire soil profile and that cover crop growing there. And then you get that cover crop dying, and you get the decomposition of all the organic matter created by that cover crop. And that's what brings a lot of the soil structure improvement. And soil structure is really important. In almost any growing system, you will increase the rate of your plant growth if you can make airspace available in your soil structure. And the ideal growing medium has 25% airspace in the soil. And that allows those gases to exchange with the root system. And so we accomplish that with full coverage systems by growing cover crops and by applying the water at really low application rates. So we don't break that soil down at any particular time with our irrigation system. And that's why the kind of full coverage we're talking about today is not flood irrigation. Full coverage irrigation can aid with the assistance of using all of your vegetation to your benefit in your production system. So for example, there's quite a bit of research now that's been done, particularly in California, about the practice of grinding pruning residue, your prunings, into chips, and then what happens when those chips decompose. And a lot of really positive things happen when those chips decompose. And your full coverage irrigation, placing water out there, enhances all of those biological benefits. It also allows them to decompose much faster, which is essential in nut crops where they're going to come that next fall and they're going to pick the nuts up off the ground. They don't want to pick all those chips up with the nuts. So again, low application rates, really important key to a good full coverage irrigation system, so that we don't break up the soil particles, or colloids as they're called, the aggregation of the soil. We don't break that up, and we keep it intact, and we can get good infiltration. Another benefit of cover crops is some of them are used as cash crops. A couple pictures here of one of them, strawberry nursery and a hazelnut planting, and dry beans grown in a walnut planting. Once in a while, those activities are beneficial. Moving on to the next topic. Now, we've spent a lot of time on cover crops, and I know that I'm probably rapidly running out of time here, so I've got to go fast. And so I won't spend a lot of time on salinity, but in some areas, water sources are such that when drip irrigation is used, high concentrations of salt will build up in the soil. A study done by ITRC demonstrated this on the west side, Westlands Irrigation District in California. And basically what they demonstrated is over a period of 5 to 15 years, salinity levels can build up to a level high enough that even new plants can't be planted until that salinity is leached out of the soil. So one might just say, well, let's just do our drip system and then we'll just leach it later. Well, the problem with that is the environmental laws at some point may not allow for the flooding of these fields and the leaching of that salt into the to the flooded water, and then the resulting runoff, or where is that salt going to go when you leach it? So those salts can be leached as I'm going to skip through these, but they can be leached as the system operates with a full coverage system. It's a great kind of circumstance where a dual system is really needed. If the drip system is going to create a salt buildup, then a full coverage system is needed to run that system 3 or 4 times for a good long irrigation and leach those salts back out of the root system. Full coverage systems for many crops are essential. One of those crops is walnuts. Walnuts will do very well on a drip system for the first 2 or 3 years. And then, like this illustration here shows, as the tree expands beyond the wetted area of the drip system, and the tree will do that because of wintertime rains. When it does that, and then it moves into the hot part of the growing season, it will stress. And it's been demonstrated over and over and over, walnuts will produce better if full coverage is used. And this concept can probably be applied to a lot of crops, other crops as well. Okay, Steve, is it time for me to answer this question on full coverage versus drip?
We'll do questions at the end if we have time. John, please continue.
Okay, that sounds good. Some crops have a period of time where during the harvest you're not able to irrigate, like tree nuts, which are dried on the orchard floor and then windrowed and been picked up. In some areas, it's been well demonstrated that a full coverage system will fill a soil reservoir, and then as the tree goes through that harvest period of no irrigation, it can withstand that time period a lot better because there's a large reservoir of moisture down below the surface of the soil. Another approach that's really good is your dual system. So you run your drip system while your nuts are windrowed and you're waiting to get them picked up. Now, some of your part coverage systems sometimes and oftentimes have soil infiltration problems. And the reason is because they're using application rates that we use with a rotator full coverage system, like maybe a fan jet system, but they're covering maybe 50% of the area, not 100% of the area. So the actual application rate of that system can get really, really high. And it can break the soil down rather rapidly, and then you have an infiltration problem. And that's illustrated by the numbers you see in this slide, where some of your fan jet systems, if you look at the treated area, the application rate is around 20 to 36 hundredths of an inch per acre. So that's just something to keep in mind as well as you compare what a full coverage system to maybe a part coverage system. A couple other quick things that are really common to some full coverage uses: cooling. Lots of good uses for cooling. We don't have time to go into that. And of course, frost protection, a widely used practice in the Pacific Northwest and in parts of California and other parts of the United States. Moving on to the next topic, applying herbicides and fertilizers. Here's a great illustration of a micro sprinkler used to start trees, or a limited coverage micro sprinkler. And you see a wetted area around each tree, and then you see a dry area. Well, pre-emergent herbicides are applied, and then ideally within about 24 hours, many pre-emergent herbicides need to be activated. That means you need a ½ inch of rainfall or sprinkler water applied over the top of them. Full coverage irrigation systems give you that ability. When gypsum is broadcast in a field, let's say that field has drip irrigation, you're just banking on rain to get that activated. A full coverage irrigation system will move that gypsum into the soil. Most organic growers tend to use full coverage systems because they're using organic fertilizers, and they need those fertilizers going to broadcast them on the surface, and they need those fertilizers moved into the soil with the full coverage irrigation. One of the negative things that happens with drip systems often is they're not managed well. And I see this a lot, particularly where drip systems are not automated, or they're on a soil like you see here in this photograph. This is a cherry block in Mattawa, Washington, and this soil is a gravelly, sandy soil. A drip system in this soil will penetrate the entire root system in an hour and a half. And sometimes we see drip systems applied in settings like this, all in the name of saving water, and that with no automation. And so they start running 12-hour sets. And on this site, the drip system on this site would penetrate the root system after an hour and 15 minutes of operation. So oftentimes it's a little bit of a fallacy with regard to a drip system, and the negative side of it is that when they aren't automated and they take a drip system in a soil like this and they run it for 12 hours, you're going to leach all your nitrogen through the root zone. It's not only bad for the environment, but of course expensive for the operation as well. Moving on to the next topic, preparing orchard floors for harvest. This should be obvious, but you know, a powdery, dry soil surface is very hard to firm up for a nut harvest preparation. Sand is almost impossible to firm up, and so that's where we see a lot of full coverage systems used is on sites that are sandy, where they know they have a challenge getting that orchard floor firmed up if they're using just a drip system. Another area where drip systems cannot completely provide what's needed is where there's soil cracking. Soil cracking not only in nuts, in tree nuts, captures the crop and then brings animals in like wild pigs and others to go eat those nuts when they fall down in the cracks, but it also causes damage to the root system of the tree. And so preventing heavy soil cracking is an excellent thing agronomically or horticulturally to do for the production of the tree crop as well. Again, we talked about this topic earlier as we talked about the wood chips. Getting those decomposed quickly, sometimes the only way to get that done is with a full coverage system and watering the entire orchard floor. So I think that kind of wraps up the topic of, you know, it's we're up really to the end of our time, but if we want to do we want to take some time for questions, Steve?
We do have some questions. A quick one, maybe the research that you mentioned in this slide here. We had a question that the research would be interesting for this person to find. So where is that research? Who did that research, and how can a person?
That came through. I'm trying to remember his first name. I can look it up and give it later, but his last name was Holtz, Holtz. He's a well-known extension advisor now in the San Joaquin Valley of California.
Okay.
And I think if you just search his name and wood chips
you'll
on Google, that research will pop up.
I think Cornell's just done some on that very topic too out of New York.
Some of the one of the real primary benefits actually is the beneficial nematode populations shoot up when those wood chips are decomposing.
Okay, a couple more if we can quickly, John. Here's a question. My trees are spaced at 16 feet by 16 feet. I want to put sprinklers in between every other tree down a row. Will that full coverage system do a better job of irrigating down my row centers than drip? The drip salesman told me that water from his system would sub-irrigate to the middles. Is he right or is he wrong, and why?
So there's several configurations to answer that question. There's several configurations of our R10 rotator that can be applied in that 32 by 16 spacing and provide very high uniformity and full coverage across the entire orchard floor. Will the drip system do that as well? Well, absolutely not, particularly the soil surface. So if you're trying to grow a cover crop on that surface, there's no way it'll sub over and wet the center of that surface. It might create some sort of a onion bulb type wetting pattern that brings some water into the drive middle, but certainly not uniformly at all. And it will only do that on certain soils where water will percolate horizontally. On a sandy soil, absolutely not. You'll not move water to the center of an orchard floor
Okay.
with drip irrigation.
Craig just got back. Craig Stafford mentioned that it's Brent Holtz is the name of the researcher that had that research on the chips in California, just for everyone's
Thanks.
information.
Thanks.
There's a
That's
lot
correct.
other questions. We actually have a lot of questions, and I will try to answer those. We're going to be out of time right now. I'll give one more. John, if you can answer it quickly. Is there a full coverage system that has been used for annual crops, such as hemp? They're used to seeing only drip tape used so far, but are interested in promoted other cropping for the soil health benefits, as well as not throwing away all that plastic at the end of the season. I know this person, and that would be on top of their list too. So what about this type of system for annual crops, other than orchards and vineyards only?
Well, absolutely, and we didn't talk a lot about annual and row crops, but there's in our R2000 WF sprinkler line is widely used for full coverage irrigation of carrots, potatoes, many high value row crops, lettuce, broccoli, cauliflower, and so forth. So yes, we absolutely can do that, and there are a lot of pluses and minuses to both kinds of systems. We can have a long discussion on that.
So anyway, I'd like to invite more questions. You can email them to me through how you got your information. The information for John's email is john.rowley. John, do you have your email address up there? But I'm going to type it and share it with all panelists. You can contact John. It's just john.rowley at nelsonirrigation.com. And so I'll let that go out to everybody. So please just send any other questions that you've got to John. We're out of time today, but thank you very much for attending this meeting on full coverage irrigation. John, thanks for a great job of presenting the topic. And if you have any other questions, please contact your Nelson Territory Manager. Send questions to John or to me. But thank you from Nelson Irrigation Technologies. Thank you for Nelson Irrigation's products being well accepted into your marketplace around the world. I hope you guys have a great, wonderful day. Thanks.
Thank you all. See you later.